In this module, there is a detailed discussion of business fixed investment, rental cost of capital, capital stock adjustment, and residential investment. The rate of investment, inventory investment, and anticipated versus unanticipated inventory investment. After studying this module, you will be able to know about the rental cost of capital, know the role of real investment rate, know about the residential investment, and know about the anticipated and unanticipated investment. Let us understand the business fixed investment. Firms use capital and labor to produce goods and services for sale. Their goal is to maximize profits. In deciding the amount of capital to be used in production, firms have to balance the contribution that more capital makes to their revenues against the cost of using more capital. The marginal product of capital, that is MPK, is the increase in output produced by using one more unit of capital production. The rental or user cost of capital, that is RC, is the cost of using one more unit of capital in production. The value of MPK is the increase in the value of output obtained by using one more unit of capital. So long as the value of MPK is above the rental cost, it pays the firm to add to its capital stock. Thus, in equilibrium, we must have value of marginal product of capital which is equals to the rental cost of capital. This is given as equation 1. The general relationship among the desired capital stock K star, the rental cost and the level of output Y is K star is equals to function of RC and Y. This is given as equation 2. The equation indicates that the desired capital stock depends on the rental cost of capital and the level of output. The lower the rental cost, the larger the desired capital stock, and the greater the level of capital, the larger the desired capital stock. As the firm combines progressively more capital with relatively less labor in the production of the given amount of output, the MPK declines. This relation is shown by the downward sloping curve in the figure. The curve YY1 represents the level of output Y1. The rental cost of capital, that is RC0, is the horizontal line. Then the desired capital stock will be K star. If higher capital stock is selected, that is K0, the MPK will be less than RC and firm would do better to cut back on capital. If output is higher, say Y2, then the curve would shift out to the right. At an unchanged rental cost, the desired capital stock would therefore increase. Moving on to discuss the rental cost of capital. The rental cost is related to the interest rate, that is, the firms would have to borrow to finance their use of capital. Since the capital is likely to depreciate over the course of an year as a result of wear and tear, and that depreciation is also the part of the cost of using that capital. Depreciation is considered as the cost because the firms have to spend money on repairs in order to keep the capital working as well as it did when it was new. Assuming per dollar of capital, D dollars per period are required to keep the capital working at full efficiency. This is the capital cost of using the capital. Thus, RC is equals to interest rate plus D. This is given as equation 3. The real interest rate. The real interest rate is the nominal rate of interest minus the rate of inflation. It is the expected real rate of interest that should be used. The firm is borrowing in order to produce goods for sale in the future. The price of the good the firms sell will be rising along with the general price level. Thus, the nominal value of MPK will be rising with the price level, but the nominal amount of interest the firm has to pay does not rise with the price level. Also, the real value of the firm's debt will be falling over time as a result of inflation, and the firm should take that reduction in the real value of its outstanding debts into account in deciding how much capital to employ. Therefore, RC is equals to R plus D. This is given as equation 4, where R is equals to I minus expected value of inflation. The firm's cost of capital is determined by the real rate and not the nominal rate of interest. Investment spending tends to be higher when the real cost of capital is lower. Next, we shall discuss the taxes and the rental cost of capital. The rental cost is also affected by taxes. The two main tax variables are the corporate tax and the investment tax credit. The investment tax credit allows the firms to deduct from their taxes a certain proportion, say T, of their investment expenditure in each year. The investment tax credit reduces the price of a capital good to the firm by the ratio T. Therefore, the investment tax credit reduces the rental cost of capital. The corporate income tax has no effect on the desired stock of capital. The firm will equate the after-tax value of MPK with the after-tax rental cost of capital in order to ensure that the marginal contribution of the capital to profits is equals to the marginal cost of using it. The corporate tax has the impact that interest payments are deducted from the firm's income before its taxes are calculated. Let us now understand from desired capital stock to investment. Equation 2 specifies the desired capital stock. The actual capital stock can differ, since it takes time to plan and complete an investment project, and because investing quickly is likely to be more expensive than the gradual adjustment of the capital stock, firms do not try to adjust their capital stocks to the long run desired level instantaneously. Very rapid adjustment of the capital stock would require expensive crash programs that would interfere with the regular production. Thus, firms generally plan to adjust their capital stocks gradually over a period of time rather than immediately. Now, we will understand the capital stock adjustment. We will use the gradual adjustment hypothesis or flexible accelerator model to learn about the speed at which firms plan to adjust their capital stock over time. The basic notion is that larger the gap between the existing capital stock and the desired capital stock, the more rapid a firm's rate of investment. The hypothesis is that firm plans to close a fraction lambda of the gap between the desired and the actual capital stock each period. Denote the capital stock at the end of the last period by k minus 1. The gap between the desired and the actual capital stock is k star minus k minus 1. The firm plans to add to the last period's capital stock a fraction of the gap so that the actual capital stock at the end of the current period k will be k is equals to k minus 1 plus lambda into k star minus k minus 1. This is given as equation 6. Here, equation 6 states that the firm plans to have the capital stock at the end of the period k be such that a fraction lambda of the gap is closed. To increase the capital stock from k minus 1 to the level of k, the firm has to achieve an amount of net investment. I is equals to k minus k minus 1. Therefore, net investment can be written as I is equals to lambda into k star minus k minus 1. This is given as equation 7, which is gradual adjustment formulation of net investment. In equation 7, the required investment function has been reached. Any factor that increases the desired capital stock increases the rate of investment. Therefore, an increase in the expected output, a reduction in the real interest rate, or an increase in the investment tax credit will each increase the rate of investment. In addition, the theory of investment contains aspect of dynamic behavior, behavior that depends on the values of economic variables in periods other than the current period. The two sources of dynamic behavior in equation 7 are: first, the first arises from expectations. The K star term depends on the firm's estimate of future or permanent output. And second, the second source of dynamic behavior arises from the adjustment lags. Firms plan to close only a proportion of the gap between the actual and the desired capital stocks each period. The adjustment lags produce a lagged response of investment to the changes in the variables that affect the desired capital stock. We will now discuss about the residential investment. Residential investment consists of the building of single family and multi-family dwellings, in short, housing. Housing is a long life asset. The theory of residential investment starts by considering the demand for the existing stock of housing. In figure, the demand for the stock of housing is downward sloping, represented by D0 curve. The lower the price of housing, that is PH, the greater the quantity demanded. The position of the demand curve itself depends on a number of economic variables given below. First, the more wealthy individuals are, the more housing they desire to own. Thus, an increase in wealth would shift the demand curve from DD0 to DD1. Second, the demand for housing as an asset depends on the real return on other assets. If return on other form of holding wealth, that is bond, is low, then housing looks like a relatively attractive form in which to hold wealth. A reduction in the return on other assets shifts the demand curve from DD0 to DD1. Third, the demand for the housing stock depends on the net real return obtained by owning houses. The gross return before taking cost into account consists either of rent or of the implicit return that the homeowner receives by living in the home plus capital gains arising from the increases in the value of housing. In turn, the cost of owning the housing consists of interest cost plus any real estate taxes and depreciation. These costs are deducted from the gross return and after tax adjustments constitute the net return. An increase in the net return on housing makes housing a more attractive form in which to hold wealth and shifts the demand curve from DD0 to DD1. The price of housing is determined by the interactions of demand with the stock supply of housing. At any time the stock supply is fixed, there is a given stock of housing that cannot be changed quickly. The supply curve of the stock of housing is the SS curve in the figure. The equilibrium asset price of housing is determined by the intersection of the supply and demand curve of housing. The asset price of housing is the price of a typical house. At any one time, the market for the stock of housing determines the asset price of housing. Let us now understand the rate of investment. The FS curve represents the supply of new housing as a function of the price of housing. The supply curve shows the amount of a good that suppliers want to sell at each price. Here the good supplied is new housing. The position of the FS curve is affected by the cost of factors of production used in the construction industry and by the technological factors affecting the cost of building. The FS, that is flow supply curve, represents the flow of new housing into the market in a given time period. In contrast, the stock supply curve, that is SS, represent the total amount of housing in the market at a moment of time. Given price of housing, building contractors supply the amount of new housing for sale at that price. The higher the asset price, the greater the supply of new housing. Thus, the supply of new housing is the gross investment in housing, total addition to the house stock. The factors affecting the demand for the existing stock housing that will affect the price of housing and thus the rate of investment in housing. Also, factors which shift the FS curve will affect the rate of investment. Because the existing stock of housing is so large relative to the rate of investment in housing, the effects of the current supply of new housing on the price of housing in the short run can be ignored. However, over time, as the new construction increases, the housing stock shifts the SS curve in panel A to the right. The long run equilibrium in the housing industry would be reached in a non-growing economy when the housing stock became constant. Constancy of the housing stock requires the net investment to be equals to zero. The asset price of housing at the level at which the rate of construction was just equal to the rate of depreciation of the existing stock of housing in the long run equilibrium. Now, we will learn about inventory investment. Inventories consist of raw materials, goods in the process of production, and completed goods held by the firms in anticipation of the product sale. Firms hold inventories for several reasons. First, sellers hold inventories to meet the future demand for goods because goods cannot be instantly manufactured or obtained to meet the demand. Second, inventories are held because it is less costly for a firm to order goods less frequently in large quantities than to order small quantities frequently. Third, producers may hold inventories as a way of smoothing their production. Since it is costly to keep changing the level of output on a production line, producers may produce at a relatively steady state even when demand fluctuates, building up inventories when demand is low and drawing them down when demand is high. Fourth, some inventories are held as an unavoidable part of the production process. Firms have a desired ratio of inventories to final sales that depends on economic variables. The smaller the cost of ordering new goods and the greater the speed with which such goods arrive, the smaller the inventory sales ratio. The inventory sales ratio may also depend on the level of sales, with the ratio falling with sales increase because there is relatively less uncertainty about sales as their level increases. Finally, there is the interest rate. Since firms carry inventories over time, the firms must tie up resources in order to buy and hold the inventories. There is an interest cost involved is such inventory holding, and the desired inventory sales ratio should be expected to fall with increases in the interest rate. Let us now understand the anticipated versus unanticipated inventory investment. Inventory investment takes place when firms increase their inventories. It is of two types: anticipated, that is desired investment, and unanticipated, that is undesired investment. Inventory investment could be high in both. Firstly, if sales are unexpectedly low, firms would find unsold inventories accumulating. That constitutes the unanticipated inventory investment. Second, inventory investment could be high because firms plan to build up inventories, that is anticipated investment. These are different for the behavior of aggregate demand. Unanticipated inventory investment is the result of unexpected low aggregate demand, whereas planned inventory investment adds to the aggregate demand. Thus, rapid accumulation of inventories could be associated with either rapidly decreasing aggregate demand or rapidly increasing aggregate demand. Now, we will summarize what we have learnt in this module. The marginal product of capital, that is MPK, is the increase in output produced by using one more unit of capital in production. The rental cost of capital is the cost of using one more unit of capital in production. Rental cost is related to interest rate, that is, firms would have to borrow to finance their use of capital. The real interest rate is the nominal rate of interest minus the rate of inflation. It is the expected real rate of interest that should be used. The firm is borrowing in order to produce goods for sale in the future. Inventory investment takes place when firms increase their inventories. It is of two types: anticipated investment or desired investment and unanticipated investment or undesired investment.